My name is James Calloway, and the most important business decision I ever made happened in 11 seconds flat, sitting across from a man who thought he was destroying my career while I was already 3 weeks into building his replacement. Here's what nobody tells you about working for someone who takes credit for everything you do. The moment they finally show you who they really are, it's not devastating. It's liberating. Because you stop questioning whether you're imagining things. You stop wondering if you're being too sensitive. You stop making excuses for behavior that was always, from the very beginning, exactly what it looked like. And that moment of clarity, that precise second when the mask comes completely off, becomes the starting gun for everything that comes after. I need you to stay with me through this entire story because what happened over the next 6 months after that meeting is something that most people in business never get to witness from the inside. Clients disappeared overnight. Vendors stopped returning calls. A company that had been operating for over a decade started visibly crumbling in real time. And the man responsible for all of it genuinely could not understand why. I watched it happen from a new office with my name on the door, and I want to tell you every single detail, because there is a lesson buried inside this story that could change how you think about your own value before someone else forces you to figure it out the hard way. But first, let me take you back to the meeting where everything started. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October. I had been with Hargrove Marketing Solutions for 9 years. 9 years of 60-hour weeks. 9 years of solving problems before they reached the boss's desk. 9 years of watching my name disappear from presentations that I had built line by line, slide by slide, argument by argument. My boss, a man named Derek Hargrove, had inherited this company from his uncle 7 years before I arrived. He had never worked in client services a single day in his life before sitting down behind that desk. He had never stayed up until 2 in the morning rewriting a campaign strategy because a client's brief changed the day before a pitch. He had never had to charm an angry CEO back from the edge of canceling a contract worth $300,000 annually. But he had learned, very quickly, how to present himself as the person who made all of those things happen. Derek called me into his office for my annual review on a Tuesday at 3 in the afternoon. He was wearing his blazer, which he only put on when he wanted to perform authority at someone. He had a printed sheet of paper sitting face down on the desk between us, and he had that look on his face, the particular expression of a man who has been rehearsing something unpleasant and is genuinely enjoying the anticipation of delivering it. I had seen that expression before. I had seen it when he informed a junior designer that her position was being eliminated 2 days before Christmas. I had seen it when he told a client that project delays were the result of his team's incompetence rather than his own missed approvals. It was the look of someone who had confused cruelty with strength for so long that he could no longer tell the difference. He flipped the paper over and slid it across the desk. I looked at the number. Then I looked at him. He had cut my salary by 43%. Not a restructuring. Not a company-wide adjustment. Not a difficult conversation wrapped in genuine regret. He leaned back in his chair and said, "The market has shifted, James. We need to realign compensation with current value delivery." He actually used the phrase current value delivery. About me, the person who had been running his entire operation invisibly for the better part of 4 years. I want you to understand exactly what 43% meant in practical terms. It meant I would have been making less than the junior account managers I had trained from scratch. It meant the number on that paper was below what any entry-level marketing professional with 18 months of experience could negotiate at a competing firm. It was not a salary adjustment. It was a message. He was testing whether I had been beaten down enough by 9 years of invisible labor to accept being treated like I was replaceable. I looked at him for what felt like a long time, but was probably 4 seconds. Then I said, "That's fine, Derek. I appreciate you being direct." His expression shifted just slightly. He had expected something else. Shock, argument, desperation. He had not expected calm. And the reason I was calm had absolutely nothing to do with resignation or defeat. I was calm because 3 weeks earlier, a man named Marcus Webb had called my personal cell phone and made me an offer that I had not yet formally accepted. And in that moment, staring at Derek Hargrove's smirk across that desk, I realized I was done thinking about it. Let me tell you who Marcus Webb is, because this is where the story becomes something different than a simple revenge narrative. Marcus had built Webb Strategic Partners from 11 employees to one of the most respected mid-sized marketing consultancies in the region over 14 years. He was not flashy. He did not appear on magazine covers or give keynote speeches about disruption. What Marcus Webb did was build a company where talented people were given real authority, real ownership over their work, and real compensation that reflected their actual contribution. He had been watching the work coming out of Hargrove Marketing for years, not Derek's presentations, not Derek's LinkedIn posts about industry trends, the actual work, the campaign results, the client retention rates, the strategic pivots that kept accounts renewed year after year. And Marcus Webb, who had spent 14 years learning how to identify where real value actually lived inside a business, had figured out something that Derek Hargrove had never bothered to notice. All of that value had one name attached to it. Mine. Marcus had called me on a Thursday evening 3 weeks before that annual review meeting. He said he wanted to offer me a senior partnership position at Webb Strategic Partners. Equity from the first day. Decision-making authority over a full division. A compensation package that was nearly double what Derek was paying me before the cut he was about to propose. He told me to take my time thinking about it. He told me there was no pressure and no deadline. What Marcus Webb understood about recruiting talented people that Derek Hargrove had never learned was that genuine opportunity does not need to manufacture urgency. It simply needs to be real. I had been sitting with that offer for 23 days when Derek Hargrove slid that paper across his desk. And in the time between Marcus's call and that meeting, I had started paying attention to something I had been too busy to properly examine before. I started mapping exactly how much of Hargrove Marketing Solutions was actually held together by me personally, not by the company structure, not by Derek's leadership, not by the systems that existed on paper, by me, by the specific relationships I had built, by the trust one had earned, by the institutional knowledge that existed inside my head, and inside the genuine connections I had developed over 9 years of treating clients and vendors and colleagues like human beings whose time and problems and successes actually mattered. What I found when I started looking carefully was more significant than even I had expected. I want to walk you through what that looked like in specific terms, because this is the part of the story that matters most for anyone who has ever felt invisible inside a company that depends on them completely. Start with the clients. Hargrove Marketing had 26 active accounts at the time of my review meeting. Of those 26, I had personally originated or rebuilt the relationship with 19. Not originated in the sense that I had cold called them and handed them to Derek to close. Originated in the sense that I was the reason they had stayed. Take Callister Group, our largest account, representing roughly a third of the company's annual revenue. Their CEO, a man named Raymond Callister, had been a client for 6 years. Derek had pitched him originally with a presentation I had built over a weekend. But Raymond Callister did not stay for 6 years because of a presentation. He stayed because every time something went sideways, and things go sideways in marketing, constantly, inevitably, I was the person who called him before he had to call us, who already had a solution drafted before he finished describing the problem, who treated his business like it was my own reputation on the line. Raymond did not have Derek's cell number. He had mine. He had sent me a handwritten note when my father passed away 2 years earlier. That is not a vendor relationship. That is something different, something that does not transfer when an employee leaves and someone hands a new contact the old account file. Or take the suppliers. Hargrove Marketing's operations depended on a network of vendors, print production, digital infrastructure, event logistics, photography, copywriting, and every one of those relationships had the same basic architecture. Derek's name was on the contracts. My number was in their phones. Our print vendor, a company owned by a man named Gil Torrance, had once held a rush job over a holiday weekend because I had asked him personally, and because over 4 years of working together, Gil Torrance had learned that when I asked for something, I delivered on my end of the arrangement without exception. That kind of reliability is not a company asset. It is a personal one. And when I leave, I do not take it with me exactly, but it does not stay behind either. It simply stops existing in that building. The internal dynamics were equally revealing. Hargrove Marketing had 31 employees at the time. I was not their manager on any organizational chart. But if you had watched how the company actually functioned for 1 week, you would have seen something interesting. When there was a conflict between the account team and the creative department, people came to my office. When a new employee was struggling to understand a client's expectations, they asked me to walk them through it. When Derek made a decision that made no operational sense and his staff needed to figure out how to implement it without destroying a client relationship, they found me, and we worked it backward together until there was a version of it that could actually function. I was not the boss. I was something more load-bearing than the boss. I was the person who made the difference between what Derek announced and what actually happened. I spent those 3 weeks before the review building a complete, honest picture of that reality. Not to feel important, not to nurse a grievance, but because Marcus Webb had asked me a very specific question during our initial conversation that I wanted to be able to answer honestly. He had asked, "James, if you walk out of Hargrove's door tomorrow morning, what do you think happens to that company over the next 90 days?" I had given him a measured, careful answer in the moment. But the more I looked at the actual architecture of that business, the more I understood what the honest answer was. The honest answer was, it falls apart. Slowly at first, then very quickly. Which brings me back to Derek's office on that Tuesday afternoon in October. "That's fine, Derek," I said. "I appreciate you being direct." I folded the paper neatly, exactly in half, and set it back on the edge of his desk. "I'll need to think about next steps." He said, "Of course. Let me know by Friday." I walked out of his office, sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and sent Marcus Webb one sentence. "I'm ready to move forward. Can we meet tomorrow?" His response came in 8 minutes. "My office, 9 a.m. Bring your timeline." I submitted my formal resignation to Human Resources the following afternoon. 2 weeks' notice. Everything documented. Everything professional. I spent those 2 weeks doing something that looked, from the outside, like extraordinarily generous offboarding. I created detailed documentation for every active account. I organized years of client correspondence and project history into structured files. I wrote comprehensive relationship notes, the kind of institutional knowledge that normally lives only in someone's head, and transferred all of it into formats that theoretically anyone could access. I trained 2 junior account managers on the technical aspects of projects I was handing over. I was, by any observable measure, the most cooperative departing employee in the company's history. What I did not do was transfer trust. And here is the thing about trust that Derek Hargrove had never understood and still does not understand. You cannot document it. You cannot put it in a handover file. You cannot train someone to have it on your behalf. Trust is the accumulated result of hundreds of small moments where you did what you said you would do, where you showed up when it was inconvenient, where you told someone a difficult truth instead of a comfortable lie, where you demonstrated over time that their interests actually mattered to you. I had 9 years of those moments with 19 clients and a network of vendors and industry contacts. None of that was stored in any company server. All of it was stored in how those people felt when they heard my name. On my last Friday, I cleared my desk quietly, shook hands with the colleagues I respected, and left the building at 5 o'clock exactly. 31 hours later, I was sitting in the Web Strategic Partners conference room, meeting the team that would become my new professional home. The disintegration at Hargrove Marketing began faster than even I had predicted. By the end of the first week after my departure, Raymond Callister had called the main Hargrove office 3 times asking for me. The first 2 times, he was transferred to a junior account manager who did not know the specific details of Callister Group's ongoing campaign. The third time, he was connected directly to Derek, who attempted to reassure him that the account was in excellent hands. Raymond told me later that during that conversation, Derek could not correctly identify the campaign that was currently running, the budget allocation they had approved for Q4, or the name of the contact at their media buyer. 3 basic facts about their biggest client. Derek did not know any of them because Derek had never needed to know them. That had always been my job. Raymond Callister called my new number the following Monday morning. He said, "James, I'm not going to pretend this is a social call. I need to know if your new firm can accommodate Callister Group." I told him I would have a capabilities overview in his inbox by end of business. I did not recruit him. I did not badmouth Derek or Hargrove Marketing. I simply demonstrated, within 24 hours of his inquiry, exactly the level of responsive, knowledgeable service that he had grown accustomed to receiving and was no longer getting from his current provider. The vendor relationships began fracturing in the second week. Gil Torrance at the print company called Derek's office about an invoice that I normally would have approved and processed before it ever became an issue. Derek's office told him to email the accounting department. The accounting department did not respond for 4 days. Gil called me out of professional courtesy not to complain, just to let me know what was happening. I thanked him and mentioned that Web Strategic was actively looking for print production partners who valued long-term relationships over transactional pricing. Gil asked for my new email address. That conversation lasted 6 minutes. By the end of the first month, I had received inquiries from 7 of Hargrove Marketing's active accounts, not because I had reached out to them, but because the level of service degradation had become visible and they were doing what rational business people do when their needs are not being met, looking for alternatives. Web Strategic Partners responded to every inquiry professionally, presented our capabilities honestly, and allowed those clients to make their own decisions without pressure. 3 signed contracts with us within 30 days of first contact. By the 45th day, that number was 5. The industry is not large. People talk. And what they were talking about, at networking events and industry lunches, and in the margins of conference calls, was the sudden, dramatic deterioration of a company that had appeared reasonably functional 6 weeks earlier. Other professionals started connecting the timeline. They noticed that the work had been excellent up until a specific date and had become chaotic immediately afterward. They drew the obvious conclusion, and that conclusion traveled through the industry in the way that accurate information about competence and incompetence always eventually does. Derek, in the meantime, was responding to his company's visible collapse in the way that insecure leaders always respond to consequences they cannot control. He started making threats about non-compete agreements and client solicitation to his remaining staff. He sent 2 emails to clients who had moved their accounts, accusing them of being influenced by a disgruntled former employee, language that the clients shared with me not out of malice, but out of disbelief that a business owner would communicate that way. He attempted to rebuild the Callister Group relationship by personally attending a meeting he had not been invited to, during which Raymond told him politely, but directly, that their decision to move was based entirely on service quality and was final. Raymond described that meeting to me afterward. He said Derek had spent most of it explaining why none of this was his fault. He had talked about market shifts, about industry challenges, about the difficulty of retaining talent. What he had not done, Raymond said, was ask a single question about Callister Group's actual needs or how he might address them. He talked for 40 minutes, Raymond told me, and he never once asked what we needed. That is when I understood that nothing was going to change. Because a person who cannot ask that question when they're losing a major client is a person who has never actually been in the business of solving problems for other people. I want to stop here for a moment because I need to be clear about something important. I did not set out to dismantle Derek Hargrove's company. I did not coordinate with his clients to move their business. I did not instruct his vendors to withdraw their cooperation. I did not recruit his employees with promises of better treatment. What I did was exactly what anyone in my position should do. I found a better situation that recognized my actual value. I left professionally, I documented everything I was responsible for, and I allowed the natural consequences of Derek's business decisions to unfold without interference. If those consequences were severe, that is a reflection of what Derek had actually built. A company whose apparent success existed almost entirely as a function of one person's invisible labor. Remove that person, and you do not have a struggling company. You have an accurate picture of what was always there underneath. The thing that Derek never understood, and this is the lesson I want you to hold on to, is that he had not been running a business. He had been standing in front of one. He had been the visible face of an operation that functioned entirely because of foundations he had not built and did not understand. And there is a version of that story where it continues indefinitely, where I accept the salary cut and rationalize it to myself and go back to making his mediocrity look like competence for another 9 years. That version of the story exists. I have colleagues who are living it right now. And the reason I am telling you this one instead is because Derek's arrogance gave me something that 9 years of discomfort and quiet resentment had not managed to give me: clarity. One piece of paper with a number on it slid across a desk with a smirk, and suddenly the choice was simple. By month 3 after my departure, Hargrove Marketing Solutions had lost 11 of its 26 active accounts. 4 of its most experienced employees had resigned, including 2 who came directly to Web Strategic Partners after giving proper notice and completing their exit obligations. The company's revenue had dropped by an estimated 60% based on what I knew about the relative value of the accounts that had departed. Derek had hired a consultant to assess the company's operational challenges. a consultant who apparently delivered a report explaining that the company's core problem was a fundamental lack of client relationship infrastructure. Derek had paid someone several $1,000s to tell him, in formal language, what I could have explained to him for free, that he had been running a company built on a foundation he had never invested in and did not understand. My first 90 days at Web Strategic Partners were the most professionally energizing period of my working life. Marcus Webb was everything Derek Hargrove was not. Someone who understood that a leader's job is to create conditions where talented people can do their best work, not to position himself as the origin point of all value while others do the actual creating. My new office had a door that closed, a team that communicated directly, and a partner who asked for my opinion because he actually wanted to know what it was. The work felt different when it carried your name. The relationships felt different when you were building them for something you owned a piece of rather than for someone who would claim sole credit for the outcome. Marcus pulled me into a meeting in my 8th week at the firm. He slid a report across the conference table, not a salary cut, a growth analysis showing that the accounts I had brought with me, combined with 2 new clients we had pitched and won together, had increased the firm's annual revenue by 22% over the previous year's same period. He said, "James, I want to talk about restructuring your equity stake upward to reflect the actual growth impact you've had on this firm." I thought about that moment for a long time afterward. The same action, a piece of paper slid across a desk, 2 completely different meanings. One a test of whether I had been broken enough to accept diminishment. One a recognition of what I had actually built. I want to tell you about the last interaction I had with Derek Hargrove, because it is the part of this story that I think about most often when I am trying to understand what the whole thing actually meant. It was at an industry event about 5 months after I had left. A regional marketing conference, 300 people, the kind of event where everyone is performing a version of professional success for each other. I was there with Marcus, meeting a prospective client we had been in conversation with for several weeks. Derek was there alone. He was working the room in the way that people work rooms when they are trying to appear more stable than they are, moving quickly between conversations, laughing loudly, wearing the blazer. I saw him notice me from across the venue. I watched him spend about 15 minutes building up the internal momentum to come over. When he arrived, Marcus excused himself with the easy grace of someone who understood exactly what was happening, and Derek and I stood facing each other for the first time since I had walked out of his building. He said, "James, you did serious damage to something I built." I looked at him, and I want to tell you that I felt anger in that moment, because I want to be honest with you about the full shape of this experience. I did feel anger, not the hot, immediate kind, but the deep, settled kind that comes from having spent years watching someone claim ownership over things they had not built, and then call it damage when the truth of that arrangement became undeniable. But underneath the anger was something else. Something that had taken me 5 months of actually building something real to access. It was pity. Genuine, uncomplicated pity for a man who had been handed an opportunity, a real business, real clients, real talented people, and had spent 7 years treating it as a prop in a performance of his own importance rather than as a responsibility to the people who made it function. He had confused authority with leadership. He had confused visibility with contribution. He had confused my patience with my permanent availability. I said, "Derek, I didn't damage anything. What you're describing as damage is just your company without the part that was holding it together. Those aren't the same thing." He stared at me, and I could see it. The precise moment when a person's self-constructed narrative meets a description of reality and cannot find a way to dismiss it. It did not look like defeat, exactly. It looked more like vertigo, like someone who has been standing on something that was always moving and has only just felt it shift beneath them. I shook his hand because that is the kind of man I intend to be, said it was good to see him, and went to find Marcus. We signed the prospective client that evening over dinner. Here is what I know now, 2 years out from that October meeting, that I want to leave you with. Not as a moral lesson wrapped in a bow, because that is not what real experience feels like, but as the honest conclusion that I have arrived at from living through everything I have described. Your value is not determined by whether the person above you acknowledges it. It is determined by what disappears when you leave. It is determined by which relationships belong to you rather than to your title. It is determined by the trust you have built, the problems you have solved, the moments where you showed up fully when you could have done less and no one would have noticed. All of that is real, and all of it goes with you when you walk out the door. The greatest miscalculation that people like Derek Hargrove make is assuming that because they own the structure, they own the foundation. They do not. Structure can be bought, inherited, and maintained through paperwork. Foundation is built by people, with specific commitments, over specific years of specific choices, and it belongs to the person who built it. The salary cut was supposed to teach me my place. What it actually did was force me to look clearly at what I had built and understand, for the first time without qualification, what it was worth. Not what Derek Hargrove thought it was worth. Not what a printed number on a sheet of paper said it was worth. What it was actually worth in the world, measured by the people who depended on it and the consequences that followed when it was no longer available to them. If you are sitting somewhere right now, reading this, and you recognize yourself in the earlier version of this story, the one where you are working 60-hour weeks for someone who misspells your name in the company newsletter, where you are solving problems that never appear on your performance review, where you have become so essential to someone else's success that they have started to treat your presence as a natural law rather than a choice. I want you to hear this clearly. Your availability is not free. Your expertise is not ambient. Your ability to hold complicated things together is not a background condition of your employment. It is a specific, substantial, irreplaceable contribution. And the moment you understand that, not intellectually, but in your body, in the choices you make every day about where you show up and for whom, everything changes. Not because you become dangerous or difficult or withholding, but because you stop making decisions based on what someone else has decided you deserve and start making them based on what you actually know about your own worth. Derek Hargrove slid a piece of paper across a desk and thought he was ending a negotiation. He was starting a clock, and when it ran out, what was left was exactly what he had built without me: an office, some furniture, and a brand name that nobody trusted anymore. I kept everything that mattered, because I was the one who had built it. If this story hits something real for you, if you have ever felt the specific exhaustion of being the person who holds everything together while someone else takes the credit, tell me in the comments. Tell me what your version of that piece of paper looked like. Because I promise you, there are more people in this situation right now than you think, and the most valuable thing any of them can hear is that the way out is not down. It is through, and what's on the other side is worth every difficult step of the journey to get there.